So I am Dr. Ann Balsamo, and I am here at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I am the director of the Media Archeology Lab. So Media Archeology Lab team here. Everyone raise your hands. You can recognize us. We're all working. Are we all using the same t-shirts? Thank you, everyone, which means nobody's back in the lab, right? Right. Okay. That's okay. The Media Archeology Lab, I'll just give you a really brief overview. Started maybe 2020, right, kind of when we were coming off of a big project that we did with the Richardson Symphony Orchestra that required us to buy all these lots and lots and lots of vintage portable computers for the 1960s. So we had this great collection of portable televisions that we did a mixed media sculpture. We've redone the sculpture, which is over now outside of the Media Archeology Lab exhibit, which is in the other building. And then as that year of COVID, I just kept buying vintage televisions, and then kind of branched out to filling in some of the other parts of the collection. So this is a relatively new lab with a number of undergraduate and graduate students who are research assistants. And what we do is, tagline, we dig culture. And I think the approach to Media Archeology Lab is not only do we look at media history, but we try to look at the media history in the kind of most kind of encompassing way, which is not simply, I don't mean simply that it's not complex, but not only the pieces of media that were created, but the entire platform and operating systems and everything, applications, software that were used to create some of the really interesting, fun kind of pieces of media that we have now. So we have, we've been working on it, and not only do we have some vintage computers, we have all these vintage televisions, cameras, sound recordings, more things, lots of things that we have there. So please come over and visit, because we have some of our artifacts out, as well as all the about 14 vintage apples kind of up and running. I also, and all of you are in my course? Yes, I also teach. This is what I actually do at UTD. I teach a course called Introduction to Technoculture in the School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology. This is a course I teach, large course every fall. And the idea for the course is to really kind of lay a groundwork for current students, young students, to think about the relationship of technology and culture, not as separate, but as things that are, intimately kind of entangled. And I am always happy to get my artist students and the animation and game students in there, as well as the engineering, computer science, management students, because they are living in yet another version or another era of technoculture. And this course goes through kind of the whole history of the different formations of technoculture, from hieroglyphics, photography, credit cards, cyberpunk, post-futurism. We kind of go across. It's not strictly a kind of historical thing, but we do look at how the technoculture of a time has changed over time, both as culture changes and as technologies change. So that's kind of my two pillars of interest that bring me here to talk today about the kind of some of the early moments in the development of what now we understand as computer art, but at the time may have been called digital art, could have been at some point algorithmic art, generative art. So it's had it's had different names, and now we kind of think about it just as kind of computer art. So this is a long and varied history, so I can't wouldn't put you through the kind of slogging of several hundred slides. So I'm going to show you just a few pieces and talk about their their significance. And I'm going to start with this one by Friedrich Nake. This is produced, as you can see, this is his marker. So kind of September 13th, 1965. And the reason I'm putting this up is because we actually have this very piece hanging in our lab right now. It's part of the art exhibition that the Media Archeology Lab kind of is hosting. It's on loan to us from the Mihai Nadine's collection of early computer art. This piece, and I'll tell you a little about its creation. This piece was a part of a series, so there's number 1, number 2, number 3. There's like 4 pieces, part of a series. One is in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and 2 others are in prominent collections of now people who are collecting digital art. So Nake was interesting. I mean, he was a mathematician, he's a German mathematician, computer science, and then became what was known as a computer artist. So his entry into this was not from the art side, but rather from the engineering. And at the time, we hadn't had the term widely used of software designer. He is one of the founding figures of this area that was particularly kind of recognized as algorithmic art. Now remember, we're in a very different era now. Everybody knows what algorithmic art is, or we think we do. But this field or this area emerged in the kind of early part of the 1960s. His work was deeply based in kind of the theories of cybernetics, so Weiner and Bentz and so on. So he was really drawing as a scientist from the work that was coming out of the mid-century kind of work on cybernetics. So that's kind of one piece, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what the code is behind this. So the way he created these pieces, and this is that notion of the collaboration of the artist and the technologist, or the human and the technologist, is it was a punch tape program running this plotter, and was absolutely state of the art. As you can imagine, at the time, he's in Germany. He used this particular plotter for many iterations until he then started to re-engineer the capacities of the plotter because of what he wanted to do with the art. So for a long time, he used what is, we would think is kind of off the shelf or, commercial grade, and then he moved to other things. So here's just a very simplistic kind of accounting of the logic, the plotting logic for that previous piece. It's all about setting kind of variables, n number of hatchings. That was the line drawings, positions, length, height, number of strokes. So this was his kind of distillation that then he wrote the program that then ran, kind of represented or expressed in punch cards that then ran the plotter. This was to him an incredibly simple thing to do. The experiment for him was experimenting with the different variables, the x, the y, the n's, the v, h, and it was in his experimentation of what is a pretty simple kind of structure for an output on a plotter that he created these pieces like you saw. As I said, there are 4 versions. They're all original prints, so it's not like he had them silk screened. They're all original prints. Then he went on to another set that worked with a different set of kind of these background logics. So again, he was an engineer and a computer scientist coming in and trying to wrestling with kind of what are the possibilities of these new machines that most people don't have access to at this point, these large plotters, but they are definitely plotting and able to plot graphic relationships. And that was his kind of one of his main kind of interests in an aesthetic sense. Here's another one that was done of his a few years later. Walk through raster. It's part of a series he called Ars Machina. And so here is when he started modifying the plotter so that it could accommodate color ink and gradations or variations to the color. How much ink was being laid down, in what order, so how the grids were being kind of layered, and so on. So these are now recognized as some of the first kind of works of computer art, which are not the first time that computer scientists or engineers had been working with machines to imagine their aesthetic kind of possibilities as visual making machines. But this is the first time that really an artist, an engineer who becomes an artist, is now being recognized in a broader kind of cultural arena as somebody who is really pushing kind of the new notion of what contemporary art would be, which is influenced by the computer. This is just the front of the first major exhibition of computer art it was in London, 1968. That Naki piece I just showed you was in here. This was pretty interesting, although, engineers' experiments with computers had started in the 1950s. The first kind of show of about 130 different participants didn't happen until this show called Cybernetic Serendipity. Most of the artwork was at the time called digital art, so they didn't actually know what the new medium was. Right? And much of what was produced were things that were graphical, kind of shapes in different directions and random combinations. And that was one of the critical elements, is the kind of the programming in the randomness, such that it wasn't a programmed kind of graph that the artist projected, but it was one that enabled or required kind of the computer to do some of the computation for the possibilities. It was, the interesting thing about it is, while this was one of the categories, Nake's work was in one of the categories, they also did computers and music, computer dance, computer poems, computer paintings, which were kind of computers running servo mechanic elements, and computer films. But the one form of kind of art that was shown in this exhibition that really kind of took off afterwards was the area of computer graphics, and led to the development of this movement called kind of computer art. There were a couple really interesting just interesting pieces, and I'm not going to go into all of these, but there's Anne and Michael Splater have a digital art collection that is, it's amazing. I've never seen the work other than on their digital website, but these are just some of the original pieces that were in that exhibition. So they have them, they collect them. Some of these were done one or two times so that they would be, there's a couple of these, again, the V&A picked up a lot of them in London, and then the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York also picked up some of them. So this is just a collection of what of the Splaters gathering of the more kind of graphic or kind of geometric pieces. All algorithms. Interestingly, there were also artist-engineer collaborations, not in a formal sense, but in an informal sense, where artists were saying, I really want something that does this. And so these are two of the machines that were also part of the exhibition. One called a mechanical pattern maker, made out of what looks to me like an erector set, but I think it's called mechanics. Yes, right? Yes. And then D.P. Henry brought and created his own bespoke drawing machine, sometimes called the Henry painting machine, and on site during the exhibition, he created paintings using the painting machine. That again, bespoke. It's not wasn't in any way industrially produced. But I want to show you a close-up of one of the pieces this is from the Splater collection. And this is a piece by the computer. I want to make sure I get this right. It is a piece by the Computer Technique Group. So this was a Japanese collective of art and engineering students from a university in Japan. They were partially funded by the IBM Scientific Data Center. And I can't emphasize enough that notion of partially funded. And so that meant these were students, just like you are all students, and they were given access to the machines that were at the IBM center, but they were all working as artists, which meant they weren't paid for being artists, which is still kind of common. But look at it's called Running Cola. I think it might be Running Cola is Africa, 1967, 68, and you'll see the number of kind of people who participated, an architectural designer who was kind of doing the design artwork, the programmer, and here's the software that they use. So their art, when it does show up, is documented in this way with the software, hardware, the output machine, even the kind of quality or the paper, with a watermark that was visible, because that was the only way that the artist could actually mark that this wasn't just an output of a computer. So the watermarking of their work ended up being a really important element for the artists. Not that anybody was denying them, but they were making sure that the watermark was available. So fast forward, we just skipped over a couple decades of work with a lot of really interesting pieces, including, for the most part, this was German, and I showed you Japan. There was a whole bunch of interesting stuff also going on in the United States, like the electronic arts technology. So EAT, that was also a group of collaboration between artists and engineers from Bell Labs. So there were some really interesting things going on in the late 60s and 70s in the United States. But that would be like a whole another talk. So here, any history of the development of computer art from the 1950s forward, I got to tell you, this is on their timeline. This is on their timeline of significant developments, which is the Apple computer, whether it's this one, this is the Apple II, but the idea of the development of the WYSIWYG was an amazing step forward for artists who now wanted to, still collaborate with engineers, because there would have been a programming element to it, but at least they could see more immediately what the programming would look like. So some of the early WYSIWYG programs, again, bespoke things programmers would do for artists, would enable them to kind of see what was being imagined before it was then going to be outputted and plotted in some way. So I'll just put this slide up from Ivy for, this is for the 1980s and so on. Now, Apple was very kind of important and significant to the development of computer art, but typically the artists who were not being kind of paid to be artists. So it really was a platform that was absolutely instrumental for the development of, I'm not going to say amateur artists, but artists you didn't go to art school to learn how to do computer art. You went to art school to learn all your basics, line, form, texture, perspective, and so on. And then you did this. You worked with mostly Apple computers, and then wherever you could with whatever sort of plotters were available, and then eventually it took a while for color printers to come out, and especially large format color printers. But Ivy, and I think the kind of history of Apple from those days, they brought this sense, and we know this from their role or their kind of signature position in the history of design, is they brought that aesthetic sensibility, not so much that they were addressing and marketing to artists, although artists really did take to these, but the idea about all the design of the computer itself, the form itself, could also be something that was inspirational, creative, expressive. So the use of color, the form, the shape. So I think we saw from very early on, not only was the Apple kind of influencing the artists, but I do believe that the artists' kind of engagement with the Apple platforms, also influenced the technology, such that, not in a direct sense, but the sense in which the computer could be a mode or a platform for cultural kind of aesthetic expression, whether it's what was being produced on them or as objects themselves. So when you come to the Media Archeology Lab later today, you'll see we have 5 jelly beans, not these, but the jelly beans up and running vintage media, and you get to see the beautiful colors of those machines from the 2000s. So this is also a bit fast forward into the 1980s. This is still a British artist, but absolutely foundationally important to the history of computer art. He's famous for saying, "I create the programs." He was a computer scientist and he understood it later on, a software engineer. I make programs, and the programs make drawings. And then there's some role about how does the computer actually kind of communicate a drawing apparatus. But he is the creator of a program. It's actually a series of programs called Aaron. And Aaron, again, is one of those signature moments in the history. This is, he programmed what he was thinking at the time were expert systems to create kind of visual output. He was very expressively interested in the relationship of technology and creativity, and how could the collaboration between a human and a machine enable a creativity that came from neither, but was manifested in both contributions, or the contributions of both. Now, he was calling it expert systems when he was doing his work, but he joined Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Lab. And so what happens very soon after that is he is then considered the kind of the progenitor of computer-based artificial intelligence art. So he's considered the first AI artist. He didn't necessarily embrace that for probably many of the reasons you all are maybe a little skeptical about the term artificial intelligence, because I think he was believing it was neither intelligence in the same way or organically, kind of coming out of its own, that it was a much more complex, I guess, interaction. So Howard Cohen, here, his early works were, again, much like Nake's, very kind of plotting, graphic, line-based. He was interested in, now he was much more interested in the kind of the randomness, the way in which he would program into the expert system capabilities, just random options, or options for random decisions or input kind of coming from the program itself. So he did a lot of work in Aaron and with Aaron, and continued to work on Aaron until like 2014, and then he passed away in 2016. So the early works were kind of very much like this, but because for him, and this is where I think the AI part gets, his programs learned, and they learned on their own, kind of running and through their own iterations. So the programs that would run next, of course, would be modified. And he had a model of machine learning, what we would now call machine learning, where he was trying to kind of match the evolution of human intelligence. So something comes back, but not everything comes back, to move forward in the expression of a new kind of possibility. But what happens as he is developing Aaron more as a kind of machine learning program that has less and less programmed instructions is that his Aaron becomes less of a program that is just doing geometric forms and so on, to programs that, Aaron, that produces a program where that is not specified in a direct way. The Aaron starts learning how to build things that come out and look like human figures. So the evolution of Aaron from the kind of the early days of Cohen's work, kind of through this one in 1989, where you start to see these elements. Now, this is not DALL-E, right? This is not someone going in and saying, "Give me a figure in a jungle with a line drawing of a palm frond." This is coming from a kind of mathematical kind of set of inputs to a program that expresses itself and expresses what it is, what its program is capable of doing. So he doesn't program the figures. Sometimes they show up in his work and in something that came out. Sometimes they don't. And so you'll see works that are actually sometimes very not incoherent, but they'd be like that. Then every now and again, you would see some sort of kind of expression like this. I put this one up here because we also have this very print in our lab, kind of on exhibition right now. This too, he's very, very prominent, and many places have viewed his work or exhibited his work, and they're collected. Now, other people who now are looking back, this is the art historians, have looked back, and this is what happens is, they say Aaron's code, it's meta art, artificial intelligence, and the work of Harold Cohen. Again, he wouldn't have necessarily claimed to be an AI artist, but other people were kind of reading that onto what he was doing. There is the first artificial intelligence coloring book that he was producing drawings and people could color them in. Here's an example of one of the pieces being done. So Aaron is not the machine. The machine is the plotter or the painter, although they were often called painting machines. Aaron is the program that's running that had been, kind of directed in some way by Cohen. So this is kind of some of his very big pieces. Here's a close-up of a series of images, and you kind of see these. So he did things like try to modify the brushes that were used on this mechanism to just enable different kinds of regulation of like density and kind of layering of kind of paint on top of one another. And you can see this is much later in his life. Here's one of the pieces that I just love. It's for the Discovery. Oh, see, excellent. The Discovery Channel. And again, this is not a conception of his. It is a communication mediated through the programming and the program parameters that then produces kind of something like this. Now this starts to look like something we would more maybe easily recognize as being a kind of work of art, and I think the point of my interest in media archaeology is this understanding the aesthetic value or kind of significance of this is actually, you really need to kind of know kind of what was the process that kind of it went through. It wasn't simply an idea that was imagined by an artist who then engaged a machine to realize it. He just had a retrospective in London where the pieces got bigger because he was building bigger and bigger plots. And then, so I'm going to end with just this kind of bit of a wrap up because we can't go much more beyond, 3 or 4 hours. But so, so the insights, I think, from the Cohen era that many people now are looking at is, here was his insight that human-machine collaborations can produce novel and creative expressions that appeal across or are realized across modalities. So music, sound, choreography, in his case, drawing, painting. And so it's not that, it wasn't that he was suggesting engineering and programming didn't do that, but that there is a way in which, with the human and the machine, where you're just not totally determining everything that the machine does. So opening up the possibilities through that collaboration was something for the machine to do that you didn't expect. Now, he started that in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're right there now. We are right there wrestling with that, with all the machine learning, kind of, image generating applications that we have available. But this was one of his insights. The second one that he was really, I think when I'm reading and we're kind of looking back at what he did was, each, the human and the machine, are embedded in a web of interdependencies. So, we might consider these, like a set of interlocking variables or, kind of variables that are kind of modified, kind of as a program runs. But it was even more than that. It was, where do the ideas come from? You couldn't, with Aaron, really see when a decision that the program enacted was enacted, because it was building in or pulling kind of data kind of arrays from things that weren't documented as code. So, and this is one of our issues with contemporary AI, especially visual. I mean, to me, which is I'm looking at, which is that those interdependencies. When we do a text prompt to DALL-E, and DALL-E comes up with something, we have no idea what were the inputs that resulted in that. Even if we put something in, like, give me something in the style of Warhol. What is Warhol? Which Warhol? Who's Warhol? And what did you take from Warhol? So those interdependencies really make the whole art process of this machine art rather opaque, which is exactly what's causing us problems right now legally. Artists, copyright, attribution, citation, sources, test, data test banks, and so on. So Cohen recognized this. This was one of the insights, I think, that we get from his work and his reflection on his work. Well, what it did reveal, was the long-standing entanglement of technology and culture. So, again, his point on this was even the very first technologies, the plotters and so on, they were already kind of having a cultural impact, and not simply on and with the use of the artists, but the way in which things were plotted and how we understood kind of the literacy of computer outputs. So he brings us back to understanding that you really can't separate kind of the technology from culture, because the people who are making the technology, simple, like making the decisions about what parameters can be, modified. What is the size of the paper? What's the size of the line? What are plotters able to kind of realize based on kind of code and program? Those are all human decisions that have already kind of influenced the capacities or the kind of what's unavailable or what's available kind of in the use of the technology. We don't usually go that far down, and increasingly it's getting harder and harder for us to even get to that point about where's the human in the loop that set up the possibilities and the capacities of the technologies that we kind of rely on and use now, even in our creative wake. Now, what in the world is going on? I just got all this stuff that's off the screen. Let's see if I can get it over. Let's see. Okay, there we go. But one of the other things I really appreciated about, as he writes in various, or responds in various interviews, is that the value of a creative piece is not based on the technology that created it, although I've shown you things that we now are significant, nor is it, as we know, it's not always based on the intention of the artist, that the value of the piece comes from the kind of the meaning that the viewer who encounters it, right? The piece is evocative, and we're the ones, as we're viewing it, and we know things perhaps when we walk to a piece, so we know, when. I mean, this is what we know. We know the date, we know who, we know under what conditions, and so on. But the meaning, is it art? Is it not art? It was art. Now we wouldn't see it as art, but that it was art, in fact, influences what we now understand to be computer-generated or computer collaborative art. So that work, this is what his work did for us, was he kind of presaged some of the issues that we're having to kind of really think about now with the generative kind of visual. These are the ones I have the most experience with. So I will, okay, let's see, I'll just get, we did that. So much to talk about, so little time. But what I would like to do is invite you all to come to the Media Archeology Lab. We're over in the next building, and I think we'll be open a little bit. And so here are some of the machines we've got up and running. They're all running vintage media. The jelly beans are the ones that were in that beautiful ad on the white table. And they're all in different, they're different generations and different operating systems. So we have different media. And the media are sometimes their applications, art generation application platforms that kids would have used. We've got something like 12 versions of a Sims 2000 from one of the computers that kids obviously used. And then we have some pieces, interactive works from artists such as Laurie Anderson and David Bowie. So we're over there, 1.705. We also have a range of some of our other kind of media artifacts from the kind of mostly mid-century. And then if you do want to go over there, the School of Art, Technology, or Arts, Humanities, and Technology has a game and media library that focuses on not so much vintage, but kind of the history, right? You'd say the history of video games and many different consoles, and it's a very sweet place. And this is where you would go. Students go, they can do research because we have a really nice game and animation program. Students can go research, or they can just engage in the fun kind of experience of playing old games on the original console. So they have, the big CRTs and things like that. So if you want to come over or to see the exhibit of some of those pieces that are on the wall, and then somebody could also give you a tour of our game media library. So this, I think, then becomes a good, I think my last slide is really saying just thank you. But I can't find my cursor. Okay, well, maybe it was thank you and it got truncated. But thanks. This is like the first time I've been able to do this sort of talk for such a mixed audience, right? Because my artist students and then my kind of fellow engineering enthusiasts who've been walking around the exhibit hall. Questions, feedback.
I actually am an AI researcher by background, and I do a lot of computer art programs. It's been an old interest. So thank you very much for this wonderful talk. One of my questions is, programs are sort of functions, right? In some sense, there's inputs and there's outputs. And so visual programs that produce visual art are functions that map some small number of inputs onto an image, a finished work of art. One way of looking at programs is in this temporal lens, meaning that it's something that makes many decisions to produce art. Another way of conceptualizing a program is simply as inputs to an output picture. Have you considered interpreting computer art in the Socratic sense of a mapping of a small number of variables into this idealized universe of perfect forms? So rather than, because in your talk you talked about decisions that we don't have insight into. The program is making decisions that we don't have insight into. Another way of looking at this is a small number of inputs given to a program that is a function that pulls from this conceptualized realm of perfect forms an image for us to look at. Has there been discussion of that or a conjunction of these ideas in any of the literature you've surveyed?
So, not in that kind of very nice, clear way. So I appreciate that. And there's probably artists whose work would be exploring that kind of more bounded kind of sense of inputs to outputs. So I don't know offhand. To me, it does seem like that's what we all could start experimenting with some of the the machine learning generated images. We started with a small, more bounded kind of set of prompts or inputs and see what comes out of it. I want to now go back, based on your question, to see some of the other pieces that, become kind of signature pieces in the history, to see how the artist conceptualized that part, which is the processing part. And some of the artists, they put their code on the back, so you can't open it again, but you can't see what the process was, but you can see what they coded things to do. That would be really interesting. So that's my limitation of not knowing the conditions for these, pieces. And in my art history background I know the signature pieces because I'm not an art historian by training, but I'm gonna definitely kind of now rethink this, or take that forward, because that's really interesting. Yes.
I know we're seeing a very small snapshot of a much bigger picture here. I'm wondering if, probably would imagine the question's been asked, and it feels like what you've talked about is leading up to that, which is at what point can the developer of the software, if you're dealing with AI, no longer claim credit for the art that that AI has created, where it's the AI that's now, is that an ethical question, or is that when the lawyers get it and the lawyers represent the AI and say, no, that belongs to my client?
Boy, I would love some of my more advanced PhD students to kind of raise in, that would be you. Because I think Murillo's not quite in the room. Is Murillo? Yeah. Do you want to jump in? That is a absolute right on the money today question. Right on.
Well, to me, that's what's so interesting is that, there's nothing sort of natural about copyright law, right? It was, created under certain historic and economic circumstances, and, it could have been otherwise. And, so it wasn't created to handle a situation like this. I mean, that already there's this, very muddy fair use area, and, I work in that space with a lot of remix video and have looked at it very closely and spoken to copyright lawyers about, how do I make sure that what I'm doing is like safe? And they're like, you kind of like, you go to court, you know what I mean? Like you go to court and like you figure it out, and hopefully you have a better lawyer than Tony. Good luck. And so like this is, that's a thing that before the introduction, for instance, like Adobe Premiere, right, or something like, or these like, or the entire kind of Creative Cloud, these things that make it very easy to remix and to whatever. It was not as much of a concern, right? And so now it becomes like, so this, the introduction of these new systems creates another kind of like crossroads where we're like, our legal system is just insufficient to handle it. But then there's also this other kind of right, this ethical question, philosophical question about like authorship. I kind of fall on like the idea that like people make machines that make art, therefore like to the extent like if I leave DALL-E somewhere, it will never do anything of its own volition yet.
Right.
Yet. It still requires me at some point to like give it a push. And it required a human being to curate a data set and to tag a data set and to code it and to build the system that it runs on. And there's so much human ingenuity around the creation of one image created by DALL-E that like, I don't know, but is there like is it a thinkable thought that we could arrive in some distant future at a place where like if I leave an AI, a generative system, and I let it take a walk down the street and it paints whatever comes to its mind? I mean, yeah, that's definitely, and I'm, like Alan Turing's, I forget what the name of the paper, it's from the 50s, but like right away he's like, we're just inventing computers, and he's already thinking like, can machines think? He's already right, boom, but like figuring out like. So
I'll just do one footnote: is it didn't happen for a very long time, but that kind of question came up when Photoshop came out.
Yeah.
So look at all the people. I mean, the first versions of Photoshop had actually pretty small credits because we didn't have all the filters and all the very things, and then it got more and more, and so. Artists now, we don't even think about questioning whether an artist who uses Photoshop is an artist.
Right.
But early on, it was the death of art, the death of the artist. It was machinic and couldn't be expressive. It was many of these things, but it was a short period of time.
Right.
Because we really liked it. We're like, we'll worry about but no one thought to credit the then 150 people who contributed to Photoshop. You barely even have to, other than an extension, you barely have to acknowledge that it's Photoshop. So, but that's different than what I think is happening quite
Imagine
now.
we're going to probably have to get that answer sooner rather than later. I use Shutterstock quite a bit, and now Shutterstock has an entire AI generated category that you license, and you buy the license to be able to use those images wherever you want. So I'd imagine between the art and also just some other things like there's funny YouTube videos of a police officer pulling over a Tesla as it's driving itself. Who gets the ticket?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So, right. I imagine that's part of all big picture here. Who gets
That's right. That's right. The where the agency is and the responsibility, and we're going to end on this, but. And what's happening almost every day, there is a new program that is going to tell you whether or not something was created by, a machine learning generative program. So now we have technological kind of solution to a technological problem, and we just get into the whole technological solutionism. And, so now digital watermarking comes way back from...
So I would imagine as a professor, you probably need to put a disclaimer in your syllabus sooner rather than later also. ChatGPT is not writing an original paper.
So, well, I will tell you, as my students know, I don't forbid what I can't police. So there's that. Like, computers in the classroom, you want to be on your email. I can't go 300 people and check if they're doing that. So I have to figure out smarter ways. So, group projects that they have to get up and talk, and they can't ever give me a paper. So they either have to be really good at using a GPT to write the paper, then they have to memorize the paper, and then they have to be able to answer a random question that I might throw at them. So we're just having to, like, literally the whole academic profession, we're like dancing to try to figure out kind of how to do things differently that, and then I think some of us are also saying, so what? So what? So what if they generate it? Partly, I will probably be able to tell in some way, and then there's always, doing the exceedingly complicated essay prompt that said, so on November 10th, when I gave you that talk about, and something that is not quite yet in our, our digital memory banks. So we're probably out of time, but I want to say thank you so much, and please, yes, come over. Media Archeology Lab. Go team, thanks team. You guys you've been so great. They have been so great. We've been working on this for almost 2 months straight. So the installations, t-shirts didn't show up, so we had to DIY. So Kyle DIY our t-shirts. So I have a great team.
Is it open tomorrow?
Yes, yeah. So we did noon to 6, and I know we stopped it today because there's the best in show, and there's I know there's things going on that we also wanted to be at. So, but we're open tomorrow. Yep. And we'll be open after the festival closes because we live here, so we can just keep the doors open. So, but definitely come on by, and if somebody's in the lab tonight because we've got stuff to do, and you're come on by, we'll show you stuff or let you look at play with some stuff. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.